Hello and welcome everybody to today's Women's Health Tech Wednesday. I am your host for today. My name is Ansley Bowen. I'm the Community Development Manager here at HitLab. And before I introduce our guests for today, I have a couple of quick announcements. We have our February symposium tomorrow. If you are interested in attending, it is free to attend from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern via Zoom. Make sure to check out the link in the chat if you are interested. We also have our HitLab Innovator Summit taking place during New York City Health Innovation Week, May 6th through the 8th. If you're interested in attending some in-person events, making some really great connections and networking, as well as hearing some really great sessions, then please feel free to scan the QR code as well as look at the link in the chat. And now, without further ado, I am so happy to announce our guest for today, Dr. Brittany Barreto. She is the author of Unlocking Women's Health, as well as a FemTech CIO, a founder, an advisory board member, and a podcast host. Thank you so much, Dr. Brittany Barreto, for being here with us today. Would love if you could do an introduction to our audience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. There we go. Hi, I'm Dr. Brittany Barreto. I'm a geneticist by training with a PhD in molecular human genetics. I'm a serial entrepreneur. We'll hear about that today, and also a venture capitalist. And I am a women's health expert. So I travel the world talking about sex and gender in product innovation, in scientific experiments, and in investment models.
Amazing. I'm so excited to dive into our session today. Like you said, you have such a diverse and impactful career that spans through multiple industries. Can you start off by walking us through how your background in genetics and early venture shaped your current work in women's health?
Yep. Well, I'm a nerd at heart. I've loved DNA since I was in eighth grade and I first learned about the mitochondria. I knew I wanted to be some kind of biologist or geneticist, and turns out I have a knack for doing experiments in the laboratory. So I pursued a PhD in molecular human genetics, but also realized I had way too much personality to work in a lab my whole life. And so didn't know what to do. And I started to explore alternative career routes with a PhD. And I took a tour of a startup, and they were wearing jeans and they were eating pizza, and they seemed really cool, and they were really smart, but they were not just saying like, oh, we're going to ask the government for more grant funding for our science experiment. Instead, they were saying, what business models could we build that then generates this solution that changes people's lives? And I just got really inspired by that energy and started my first biotech company in grad school. It was called Pheramore, and Pheramore was the world's first DNA-based dating app. So I matched singles based on an algorithm I created that looked at your pheromones and personality type through your genetics and matched you with local singles that you were biologically compatible with. So a whole
Wow,
nother panel we could have about that startup.
that
But
is so cool.
yeah, I fundraised about $1.2 million for that venture and built and
Wow.
scaled it. Unfortunately, overnight, Apple decided to kick us off the App Store. They created their first ever policy around DNA testing in the App Store. Previously, they had no other policies around genetic material in the App Store. And as a geneticist, I thought it was a great move because they limited it to only ancestry and medical. But as a
Mhm.
business owner, it was terrible because dating apps were not on the list of acceptable apps to ask for your DNA. So we got
Right.
kicked off the App Store. My Series A fell through and had to close the company. So I'm a real entrepreneur. If you failed, that's okay. You are just one step closer to your win because I use that failure as a springboard and got a job at a venture capital firm because now I knew about entrepreneurship. Now I knew about fundraising from the other side of the table. And so a geneticist all of a sudden was working at a venture capital firm, and I was
Mhm.
leading investments, and I was meeting with healthcare companies, and I found myself really, really passionate whenever I met a women's health company, also known as FemTech. So FemTech
Mhm.
is innovation in women's health and wellness. Yes, this includes things that solely affect females like pregnancy and menopause and menstruation, but it also includes things that differently or disproportionately affect females like
Mhm.
autoimmune disease, migraines, Alzheimer's, osteoporosis. And so anyways, I was meeting with these companies and became really passionate about it, wanted to learn more. And whenever I looked up Femtech, this was 2019, I couldn't really find anything. There was no community groups, there was no newsletter, there was no podcast, there was no book. And so I've dedicated my life the last 5 years to filling in those gaps. And so we have the Femtech Focus podcast, we have Unlocking Women's Health, Femtech in the Quest for Gender Equity. I know that we're going to have the link drop for Amazon in the chat there. But but we also do, we have the 2,000 person Slack community. We have accelerators that I've put on and events. And like I said, today, mostly spend my time advising large brands on their women's health strategy and supporting founders innovating in the space. So that's a little bit of my career trajectory from pheromones to
Wow.
vulvas. It's taken quite a ride.
I love that. Oh, wow. I would say you are a true innovator, just from hearing that story. And I love how kind of when one door closes, multiple other doors have
That's
opened, it
right.
seems, for you. So, well, congratulations on just your career so far. Again, there's so much more I'm sure that we could dive into, but I am just fascinated. That is such a good idea, of that dating app. Wow. And I was going to actually ask, what did spark your interest in femtech? But now I'm kind of more curious of what continues to drive your passion for improving this area.
Yeah. Well, I do love to tell the story of the first femtech company. So I'll
Yeah,
share that with the audience.
please.
I was meeting with the founder. She was a pediatric gynecologist and she showed up to our meeting in scrubs from work and she kept saying the word vagina. And I was like, oh my God, we're public. Why does she keep saying this word? Which is so funny considering how often I publicly say that word today. But she kept saying it because she was creating the first ever vaginal stint. So essentially, every orifice, every tube in your body, there is a medical stint associated with it, whether it's your esophagus, your artery, even your rectum. And so nobody had ever created a vaginal stint before. And so when she was doing surgery on little girls' vaginas, whether that be reconstruction because of a birth defect or a trauma, or maybe there was a tumor that had to be removed, anytime she needed to reconstruct the vagina, she had no medical device to help maintain the integrity of the tube of the
Mhm.
vagina. And so she invented the first ever stint. And the way she was telling it to me, I thought to myself, that seems pretty basic. That seems really, really basic. Why does that not exist yet? And that really was the first story that started my investigation into, well, if that's not being addressed, what else isn't being addressed? And
Right.
that's when I learned about things like the tenaculum, which is kind of this like clampy claw-like medical device that is used in gynecological
Mhm.
procedures, such as when you have an IUD inserted. Did you know that the tenaculum was originally invented to remove bullets during the Civil War? Right? And that is the
No.
medical device we're still using today. And so
Wow.
on one side, we have that I'm an activist and I'm an advocate and I want, social impact and I want equality and I want quality healthcare for everybody, for every race and gender and sexuality, et cetera. And on the other hand, I'm a businesswoman. I'm
Mhm.
a businesswoman. And when you tell me the current medical device is over 250 years old, all I think of is opportunity. I think of
Absolutely.
opportunity, right? And so it's twofold. It's a industry that is a movement that says, "Hey, we've forgotten half the population in our experiment and our product design." But it's
Mhm.
also an investment and innovation opportunity that says, "Hey, there's some really low-hanging fruit and some quick wins we can make in this industry."
Absolutely. Wow. I mean, I know I had no idea that that is still being used. And the fact that there has not been something else that has been at least more comfortable, to be invented for women is crazy. So, I mean, definitely I see there are so many different areas and like you said, having an innovative mind and a business mind. There's a lot of things you can really do in the femtech area. And kind of talking about like the landscape, how has the femtech landscape evolved since you first enter it? And then where do you kind of see it heading in the next 5 to 10 years?
My gosh, it has evolved radically. So first and foremost, over 50% of femtech startups have been founded in the last 5 years. So we have a database of about 1,700 femtech startups. 50%, 50, founded in the last 5 years. This
Wow.
is a boom. This is a huge boom. And we've investigated at our firm, why is that? And some of the factors are women in STEM. So women
Mhm.
who are researchers and engineers, maybe they themselves experienced a very painful IUD insertion and they said, I literally make med devices as a job. I'm going to create something that works better, right? So you have women in STEM creating solutions. You have women in finance funding these solutions. So female angel investor hears about a new solution for menopause hot flash. And meanwhile, she's currently having one, right? And she's like,
Mhm.
yes, take my money. And then you have just gender equality starting to come up, right?
Absolutely.
Conversations about sex and gender.
Mhm.
And so we're seeing this huge, huge momentum happening. We're seeing this industry booming. And how I've seen it change is for me, when I started in 2019, when I would say femtech, everyone thought I said fintech. And I said, oh, no, not fintech, femtech. And they'd say, oh, female founders. And I'd say, well, predominantly we are female founders, but that's not the point. The point is the product and the consumer,
Mhm.
and and so today I don't have to have that conversation. I say femtech, everyone says women's health, right? And so I feel really proud of how far we've come. There is a lot more to do. Do not get me wrong, we are not
Absolutely.
done. But I mean, literally just based on the word and its presence in people's minds, it's absolutely gained so much momentum. Oh, and you asked me where do I see it going?
Yes.
I mean, I the very far version is that femtech just gets integrated into healthcare. So similar to pediatrics, right?
Mhm.
Child care, healthcare. You don't really see like, oh, and here's the pediatrics panel or here's the pediatrics thing. It's kind of warped into all the other
Mhm.
verticals of healthcare. And I hope that one day femtech is wrapped into regular healthcare and that we're not this
Absolutely.
like standalone kind of thing. But I don't think that we have enough funding, traction, or respect as an industry yet to have that. So
Mhm.
that's my far-reaching goal is that femtech is just wrapped up into healthcare because my goal is that everybody, whether you're doing stroke or you're doing heart disease or you're
Mhm.
doing pregnancy, everyone is asking, was sex and gender considered in this clinical trial? Was sex and gender
Absolutely.
considered in the cell model that we used, right? And today that's not a thing that's always asked. So until we're
Absolutely.
there, yeah.
And that kind of brings back to your point in the very beginning is, femtech, typically when we hear the word femtech, even now, we just think of women's health, but it is so much more, right? It could be cardiovascular health, it could be Alzheimer's, so much more that affect women differently than men. And so I think that's so important also that femtech in the future is you look at it as a whole, not just as one little portion of what it is. So
And you know
absolutely.
why that's so critical is because the number one reason that drugs are pulled off the market is due to negative side effects to females. And so you do not have to work in women's health to care about women's health.
Right.
Your biggest risk in your healthcare investment firm is if you didn't consider sex and gender in the product design, right? And so
Absolutely.
you don't have to do pregnancy to care about women's health.
Exactly. And even surgeries, right? Like some surgeries
Yep.
are based on the male anatomy, not the women's anatomy. And so, like for a hip replacement, for example, totally different for men versus women. So, absolutely, it doesn't matter where you're working in healthcare, you can always be considered women's health when you're working in those areas. So,
That's right.
absolutely.
I,
Um, and in terms of also too about institutional level, what do you think is the most significant shift that needs to happen at that level to really be able to support the growth of fintech?
Well, we need more pharmaceutical companies investing in and working in women's health. Less than 4% of pharmaceutical R&D dollars is dedicated to women's health. If you
Mhm.
remove cancer, that goes down to 1%. To put that into context, 2% is dedicated to the prostate alone. So
Mhm.
2% of R&D dollars, single organ in males, prostates, 1% all of women's health, right? And all of our organs and hormones, et
Right.
cetera. So
Wow.
there is just this disproportionate thing from my research, there were some major lawsuits back in the 90s. So vaginal
Mhm.
mesh and Essure, which was these little metal coils that they put into your fallopian tubes, and it caused scar tissue, and that's what caused you to be sterile. So it's essentially a
Mhm.
way to tube tie. And news alert: when you put metal into the pelvic floor or into the fallopian tubes and cause scar tissue to solve things like pelvic organ prolapse or to solve things like contraception, the immune system doesn't like it. The immune system
Mhm.
does not like when you have metal in your body. And so surprise, surprise, all these women developed some really serious side effects, and there was these huge lawsuits. And so pharmaceutical companies said, whoa, women's health is just way too dangerous, way too
Mhm.
hard, we're not going to touch it. And so funding just dramatically dropped. Today we have Organon, which is a spinoff from Merck that
Yes.
is focused
Mhm.
on women's health. But I mean, God, they're just one company. You're right, that's
Right.
one little company. And so I think one of the biggest things we need is more pharmaceutical companies getting in the
Yep.
game of innovating in, investing in, and acquiring in femtech.
Absolutely. And that's the exact opposite of what they needed to do, right? You'd be like, no, we need to focus more.
I
Um,
mean, I think about it and I think to myself, who at the table thought, let's just put metal coils in their body and
right,
the scar
right.
tissue will fix it? I'm
It's
like, oh
fine.
my God, who was sitting at that table? But
Oh
we
my
now have
God.
more people at the table.
Definitely. And talking kind of about people at the table and roles, what also do you think that venture capital and investments can help play in the growth of femtech? And then what changes would you like to see how investors actually approach women's health and innovation?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't. So when I looked up Femtech in 2019, there was one fund in the world and it was Portfolio. So shout out to Portfolio. They just closed their third Femtech fund, right? And they're the oldest Femtech fund. They're the most invested. And yet it was only a $10 million fund, which is this essentially the smallest amount of money you need to be called a venture fund. Okay. So the
Mhm.
smallest possible amount was the first and only Femtech fund in the world. And today we have over 13 funds, which comes out to about $320 million, which is fantastic. Still
Yes.
just, I mean, $320 million goes to one white male every year for some kind of AI social platform. And so
Mhm.
I would be remiss to say, oh, we're good, like we still need
Right.
a hell of a lot more money. But we're on our way. I mean, from 1 to 13 in 5 years is radical. That's incredible.
Mhm.
So, what I would say is that we need more venture funds investing in femtech, not only specifically femtech funds, but also healthcare funds. So, one thing that I am hearing is healthcare funds will say, oh, we've made our women's health investment, as in it's one box to check. And it's like,
Right.
that's so far you're missing out on the opportunity. And at the end of the day, it's like we're not asking for a favor. We're actually providing them an opportunity to make a ton of money. So we're giving them a chance to make a ton of money because remember I said that pharmaceutical companies are not investing in R&D. What they're
Mhm.
doing is they're waiting for medical devices or diagnostics or therapeutics to get just a little bit of good safety data. You don't even have to get FDA approval to get acquired. We've seen many femtech companies getting acquired prior to even FDA approval. That is a dream for any medtech founder or investor, right? Usually you're thinking about, all right, we need FDA approval, we need billing code, we
Mhm.
need commercialization, we're going to need to hit the, 100 million in revenue, and then somebody might consider us. And femtech, the average time to exit is actually closer to 6 to 7 years versus 9 to 10 for most other products. And so
Wow.
it's a favor to tell you about femtech and
Yeah.
get your money to be involved in it.
Absolutely. We also kind of covered this as well as like women's health is kind of an afterthought in mainstream healthcare.
Mhm.
How do you feel like we can shift this narrative both from a cultural and a policy standpoint?
Well, first and foremost, we need better education in medical schools around sex and gender. So our textbooks are based on men. And I
Mhm.
mean,
Yep.
there are some really pivotal cornerstone understandings of human health that when you actually go back to the paper and say were females even included, they weren't. So for example, baby
Mhm.
aspirin, everyone thinks, oh, baby aspirin, that's really good for your heart health, take a baby aspirin every day. Well, it turns out that study was done on 60,000 men, and when they recently redid the study, including women, baby aspirin has no effect on our heart health because turns
Wow.
out heart disease manifests really differently in our heart. And so the baby aspirin doesn't affect what we're getting in terms of the negative consequences of the disease. And so, medical schools, we need to ask ourselves, what are all the things that we assume and ask, is this, I mean, even I did a article on ICU. In the ICU,
Mhm.
the volume of air they use into your lungs is based on a male's lung size. So women actually leave ICU with severe damage to their lungs simply because the volume was turned up too high. In terms of how much air they were getting. So, I mean, we need to go back to what is our basic understanding of health and what people need and adjust it accordingly.
Yes, absolutely. And also too, I know you've actually spoken internationally about the future of women's health innovation. So I wanted to get your perspective too about what are some of the most exciting trends that you're seeing globally, and then how do you feel like the US can actually learn from them as well?
Well, it is really exciting to know that this is a global sensation. Because guess what? Women are everywhere.
Yes.
We're everywhere.
Newsflash,
And
yep.
and also kind of on the sad side is that this paradigm of the male baseline is everywhere too. There
Mhm.
has not been a country or a culture that has said from day one, oh, well, is this cell line? Here's the male cell lines and here are the female cell lines, or here's their female animal model, here's your male animal model, or females are 50% of clinical trials. Like there's there's no culture or society that took that into account. That we're all kind of on the same page. Now, you're absolutely right. Different cultures are taking off in different capacities. So we see in East Asia, they are really struggling with their low fertility rate, and they have been
Mhm.
struggling with that for the last 2 decades. And so they're a little ahead of us in terms of um, their investment and their desire to fix the fertility crisis in East Asia. And in fact, I've been flown to Tokyo several times, and I have not been flown to Tokyo because of healthcare people. The literal government, the government of the Minister of Economy has flown me out to Tokyo.
Wow.
Why does the Minister of Economy care about fertility rates? Because Japan depends upon their own population to repopulate. They don't have a real strong immigration. And so
Hmm.
when you have a population that is decreasing and you have huge brands like Toyota or Fujifilm, and you're saying, who's going to work here in 30 years? Like, there's literally not enough baby Japanese people
Wow.
to employ us. Our GDP as a country will shrink. And so, although right now it seems like in the United States, women's health and women at a political level is being
Hmm.
sidelined, I promise you it is going to whip around, boomerang back in front and center. And so we need to continue to work on women's health today so that when it does boomerang back and America realizes, oops, women's health is actually critical to everything we do as an
Right.
economy and our GDP. We need to care about it. We need to already be at that table to be to make sure we're setting the
Absolutely.
standards that are safety for women. So it's really actually quite interesting to see the future in East Asia and what it's going to eventually be worldwide.
Wow, absolutely. I mean, that is just, again, your career is just so interesting to hear about and the things that you've gotten to done just, from point A to point B and where you got to those different points is so amazing. I mean, I would never have thought that the economy, the economics has something to do directly with women's health and fertility and reproduction, but it does. So again, just kudos to you for such an amazing, amazing career. I could sit here and listen to you talk about it for a very long time. But also as we mentioned that women's health issues are often, under researched as well. So from your perspective, what are the most underserved areas of women's health that we need more attention from not only just researchers, but also healthcare providers and then also tech innovators as well?
I used to say menopause and the pelvic floor, and I'm proud to say that I feel like those are being addressed. Those
Yes.
solutions are not
Mhm.
necessarily in the market yet. Some are, but a lot are more like in development still. But I feel confident that they're being addressed, they're being worked on. So
Yes.
whenever I hear of someone saying, I want to work on urinary incontinence, I'm like, there's like at least a dozen that are in progress that are, not saying that you shouldn't, but here are my new areas. Here are my new talking points.
Mhm.
Mental health and pharmacokinetics. So what do I mean by that? Mental
Mhm.
health. I think that, mental health as an industry is new and growing, right? In terms of people saying it's okay to say that you're sad. It's okay to say you have anxiety. We are less stigmatized around PTSD and things. And yet I think that there's another phase we still have to go through in terms of so much of women's mental health is hooked up to their hormones. So a lot of mental health issues occur during infertility treatment, during postpartum depression, during menopausal rage, right? So they're hormone related. And so we have these really unique times of our life that we need extra mental health support. And I don't think we have built a system or solutions yet that really provides those specific stages of life mental health support. The second one is pharmacokinetics. So the
Yeah.
more that I started as a geneticist. I'm still a geneticist. I have
Yes.
DNA tattooed on my bicep, right? Like very much a nerd. The more I learn about hormones, the more I realize that the way that pharmaceutical drugs are dosed, take your pill every morning, is
Mhm.
based on a paradigm that you have a 24-hour hormone cycle, which is what
Right.
men do. Females, we have on average a 24-day hormone cycle on average, right?
Wow.
And why does that matter? Well, your hormones, that besides your genitals and your reproductive organs, the place in your body with the most hormone receptors is your brain. And so we actually know that drugs that interact with the brain, whether that be SSRIs for your depression, your
Mhm.
anti-seizures or your anti-Parkinson's drugs, anything that interacts with the brain is affected by your hormone levels. So women with Parkinson's, in particular early stage Parkinson's, so meaning they're still menstruating, they have reported my symptoms are worse when I'm menstruating. My drugs do not work as well when I am
Mhm.
menstruating. And so the research is starting to come out that, oops, Yeah, the drug, the efficacy, the effectiveness of a drug is actually changed based on where a woman is in her hormone cycle. And so potentially one day we might have, our birth control packets, our meds might come in 28-day birth control packets where you
Yeah,
actually have different milligrams every week of your menstrual cycle because your body, your biological metabolism is changed. And so I feel like it's really exciting because 5 years ago I was like, women enter menopause, and people were like, menopause, what's that? And I'm like so excited that we're like kind of past the basic 101 of female
yes.
health, and that now I'm sitting here starting to think about like, okay, what's deeper? What's deeper? What's next? What's next? And it's like, oh my God, I think all of our drugs need to be changed. At least the ones that interact with the brain. So that's what
Absolutely.
I think the future is.
Absolutely. And yeah, no, I know when you said menopause at first, I was like, I love it because in the past year of 2024, just people being more confident and talking about menopause and
Mhm.
hot
Yeah,
flashes and all of the kind of symptoms that go with it. I feel like it was almost, a breakthrough last year, at
yeah,
least in my opinion, for menopause. So it's great that we
that's
can
right.
now really go deeper in the, below the
Yep.
surface.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and while we only have about 3 minutes left, I did want to get to an audience question. So, with seed funding in jeopardy due to the changes in federal grant funding, what are other ways that you think femtech startups can fund before the angel stage?
Before the angel stage. Oof. Um, so there's crowdfunding. So in case you've created a platform with a community group, there is a lot of women that do have some capital to participate in. And honestly, that's a great way to signal to investors that people want your product is that the actual end user has already participated, even if it's $100 investment. So crowdfunding is one way to do that. And also, I would actually start to look at investors outside of the United States. So there's starting to be a lot of capital activated in Europe and Asia, specifically East Asia. What did I just talk about? I had
Yep.
5 minutes on Japan, right? I meet with so many very wealthy families, governments, and funds that are in Singapore, in Vietnam, Thailand, in Japan, Taiwan, that are looking for solutions, and they're happy to invest in a U.S. based company. So U.S.
Mhm.
investors require international companies to come to the US. International investors are not like that. They're much more open to your headquarters being based in different countries. And so I actually think as people have been asking me this lately, do I think investors are going to start to look outside the US? I don't think so. I think they rather sit on their money and wait for more like instead of volatile times, more stable times. Whereas startups, we don't have the luxury to sit around and wait. I think startups are going to start to look outside the US for capital. And I think East Asia is a totally untapped area.
Amazing. And one more question for you while we're almost at time, but I have to ask this question. For young women or entrepreneurs that are hoping to break into the femtech space, what advice would you give them about building a career in this exciting but very evolving field?
Well, first, you can get involved by going to femhealthinsights.com. I'll add that to the chat. And that's where you can join our virtual community group, which is Slack. In the Slack group, there's actually a bunch of sub channels. So don't just join the regular channels you're automatically added to. Go to sub channels. There's a subgroup for Boston, subgroup for San Francisco, and they do
Amazing.
meetups. And so join the community, learn more there. There's reports to be read. There's my podcast you can listen to. There's my book you could read, Unlocking Women's Health. And these are ways to get involved and learn more. And also don't shy away from thinking, okay, well, I currently work at this company. Could I do femtech internally? And so, for example, Aura Ring. Aura Ring was not focused on women's health until someone internally said, we haven't been doing hormones at all. And now Aura Ring is like winning awards for being leaders in women's
Yeah.
health. So, where do you work? And even if it's, let's say, a bank, women work there. That bank is losing money on every woman who gets breast cancer in their office. They're losing money for every woman who takes a day off because her menopause is too intense that day, right? So, how can you stir the conversation within the industry, within the company you work at to say, we should do a workshop on, menstrual disorders in the workplace? We should look at our benefits. Are we covering things that our female employees need? Because you're then a femtech innovator, even without a startup.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Brito, for all the amazing insights. Again, we could talk for hours about your
Yeah,
career,
we
but
could.
kudos to you. Thank you so much for your time today. Again, if anyone is interested in her book or also connecting with her, all the links are in the chat for that. But thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you.
And I would encourage everybody to please join us next week for our next chat. Also would like to thank our sponsors. And of course, one more huge, huge thank you to Dr. Brittany Barreto for being here with us today. Thank you, everybody. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Bye-bye.